Today we'll be replacing the primary downpipes with these mad high flow catted downpipes. Now the process is very similar, at least at the start, as the secondary downpipe replacement video I posted. So we'll be removing this cover and the two DME covers and then start taking off everything on top of the primary cats to be able to get to the primary cats. Next step is to remove 5 bolts. One here, this one, and one right here. Then you can take this plastic piece out after you unhook all of these cables from it. Next step is to disconnect the O2 sensors from their connection points up here. So one on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. These clips are held in, or the connections are held in by a little clip on the side here. So pull on that, lift up on the connection, and then disconnect these by pressing on this clip and pulling on both ends. Then feed the wire out from its clips here, because the next step will be to remove this metal tray. To remove this tray, we have to work around the coolant tank reservoirs. So there are multiple bolts on the side of this tray. We'll have to lift these guys out of the way. This one has a little rubber grommet it sits into. And you can start to see those bolts. So we'll have to go around, remove those on both sides, work around this tank as well. And then we'll be able to take this tray out. To help ensure I don't drop these bolts down into this engine bay, I like to take a magnet after I loosen the bolt, grab that bolt, and pull it on out. On the driver's side, if you have the OEM tank, it will be pressed into 2 rubber grommets as well. With the aftermarket tanks, they usually don't press into these grommets. So we can see there's a bolt there, one back there. There's one more that I'm not showing. Yeah, back right there. So take those out. We just took the other side out, and then we'll be able to try to maneuver this plate out. Before we maneuver that plate out, we'll want to make sure that all these connections, these wires, are disconnected from the plate. So down in here, these wires are clipped into these metal components here. These can slide off of the plate. You don't have to take the wires out of this metal holder. So you can pull this up and off the plate. So go around the plate on both sides and make sure everything is disconnected. You'll be able to get this plate out without removing these 2 bolts here. That's what I did with the secondary downpipe replacement. But I had to put a lot of stress on this thing as I turned it. So I removed these 2 bolts, and it gives you a lot more room to move this around, and it should make removing that plate a lot easier. That plate's removed. Again, you lift this guy up, move it to the side, and move that plate out this way. Now the fun starts all over again with another plate. This one has similar bolts on the sides, so remove these bolts. Now to remove this plate, after you remove the bolts on both sides, we'll need to remove the O2 sensors, these pre-cat O2 sensors. I went ahead and labeled mine driver and passenger, just to make sure I put them back in the same place. The clips might be exactly the same, but just to be sure. So you'll need a O2 sensor socket like this one to be able to get around the wire. So we'll put that on around the wire, pop it loose, and then we'll thread it out by hand. And every time we thread it, we'll try to take care of this wire to make sure it's not banging around, getting twisted and damaged. Now with the O2 sensors removed, the shield should be free to move around and be removed from the car. It's tough to navigate around these heat shields here on both sides, and there's a clip that it presses into on the back. So you have to pull the back up out of that clip and then squeeze it around these heat shields. We can finally see the primary caps. Next, we'll have to remove the post-cat O2 sensors on both sides. To do that, you'll follow this cable all the way up to where it connects. It's underneath this guy, right here. We'll disconnect that to have that cable move freely. We'll pop it loose with the O2 socket and thread them out. To remove the O2 sensor connection here from the holder, you need to go in behind this connection. Be tough to get the light on it. And there's a tab where the connection meets the holder. And you'll have to go in there with a pick tool and press on that tab to be able to slide the connection off of the holder. Here's a look at that disconnected. So this is where this slides on. This is the tab inside of there that you press up and allows it to slide forward. Similar story on the driver's side. The O2 connection is down here. Can't tell yet if the connection's on this side or the back side. I believe the back side, so you'll have to stick a pick tool in there, be able to slide this off. If you're having a hard time with that, you could probably take these two screws out and get better access to that connection. Now we can begin taking off the clamps up top. These bolts holding the downpipes to this holder and the clamps down below. Have the clamp bolts removed on the top and bottom clamps. The bolt for mounting the downpipe to this bracket off. And then you have to take off 4 more bolts holding the bottom bracket. They go in right here. So 2 on that side and then 2 over here. You can see I haven't taken these out yet. For this side, I was able to get a socket and a wrench in. For that side, it looks like I'm gonna have to use an Allen key. I have a hard time with these top clamps, but take a pry bar and get in between the clamp when the bolt's out and just pop it off. They'll be somewhat stuck in place. You might have to do that with the bottom clamps as well. We're ready to put the new downpipes in. So before you maneuver these downpipes into place, get these bottom clamps over onto the secondaries and out of the way so you're not hitting them when you're trying to get these new clamps in. Same with the tops. Move them up out of the way and then we'll get the new downpipes positioned and then we'll start tightening everything up. Finally have the new downpipes in place. It was not easy getting them to line up perfectly. It was a balance of getting this top one tightened down and the bottom one. So what you do is you put these bolts in first if you can, this one and the 2 back here. Put those in first, but leave them loose so there's enough play for it to wiggle this around and get it perfectly seated against both surfaces, the secondary and the turbos here. Then you try to get these clamps around here and slowly tighten them down, alternating back and forth between the 2. On the driver's side, it wasn't lining up. This bolt wasn't lining up with the holder. Those bottom 2 weren't lining up, and it wasn't sitting perfectly against the turbo and the secondaries. So my theory there is that when I put on the secondary downpipes, the pipe wasn't perfectly positioned. So what I did is I had to bust out the quick jacks and I lifted the car off the ground, loosened the 2 bolts on the secondary downpipe and the clamp to the exhaust so that the secondary can move around a little bit. And it didn't fix it 100%. The fitment wasn't perfect up top, but I was able to get it to work. I ended up having to loosen this clamp here. So I loosened the 2 bolts down here, give me a little bit more room to wiggle this around. And eventually I was able to get the bottom bolts in place, then get this in place, leaving them loose, just like I did on this side, and then slowly tightening down both the top clamp and the bottom clamp. Now there are a couple tools that make this job a lot easier. A ratcheting Torx wrench. You need E12 for the clamp bolts, and as well for the 2 bolts back here on the passenger side. So these 2 silver ones on the downpipe bracket. It helps to have a 1/4 inch ratcheting wrench and a 6mm bit, Torx bit, and you put that in there and you're able to tighten those back bolts on the driver's side with this because the clearance is pretty tough in there. And when I got everything tightened up and the fitment wasn't perfect, it put a lot of tension on those back 2 screws. So Getting an Allen key in there or threading them down by hand wasn't possible. I had to use that 1/4 inch ratcheting with the 6 mil bit. Okay, now that the downpipes are in, we can start with the O2 sensors. We'll get the O2 sensors placed in. Then we'll be able to do the heat shielding, the 2 heat shields, starting with this one, then this one. The first cover on, the O2 sensors in place. Gave me a little bit of trouble to get the O2 sensors and these bolts to line up perfectly. So I had to get the O2 sensors in first, keep them loose, then get these bolts into place. Everything's back together. Now it's time to start it up and see how it sounds.